In shadow psychology, there's the idea of projection when you attribute psychic contents from the inside onto situations and people from the outside, and typically we make it negative. We think of negative projection being when you're triggered by someone, when you're hating against someone, or when you're otherwise in an adversarial symbiosis with the object of your projective fantasy. And when you start looking at romantic projection, or you start looking at positive projections, you enter into golden shadow territory, because the shadow isn't only darkness, it's also highest potential. This is the band of your consciousness. For simplicity's sake, yes, you can go towards the dark, but we also need to look at the light. And in today's video, I'm going to be giving you an extremely practical walkthrough exercise to discover your golden shadow and become your best self and your highest self, and all the cliche phrases that I try and avoid. But we're on YouTube, it's the first minute of a video, let's actually do some real psychological work. Grab your journal if you want to, but if you're like me and you often don't journal on videos where people say grab your journal and do it with me and you just want to listen, that's also okay. I've kept that in mind. Today we're going to be owning our own shadow, not necessarily with Robert Johnson, but it's important just to frame a bit of psychology, just so you know what we're talking about. What is the golden shadow? It is the unconscious, repressed parts of us which are beyond the threshold of self-actualization. In a nutshell, it's your highest potential, it's your true self, it's your soulful essence, it's everything that you could be, and in many cases you might even be a little bit hesitant to go there. As Robert Johnson says, quoting from the book, to draw the skeletons out of the closet is relatively easy, but to own the gold in the shadow is terrifying. It is more disrupting to find that you have a profound nobility of character than to find out that you are a bum. You can read this book for yourself, or if you want to join me inside the Shadow Work Library, where we start on these basic beginner foundations and then quite rapidly move towards intermediate and advanced space, you can see on the screen right now, that's exactly what I do in my course. For the sake of this exercise, let's explore your golden shadow in terms of the shadow entities, shadow behaviors, and shadow territories that we've already established in this Shadow Work series. You can see the full playlist down in the description. For simplicity's sake, let's start with shadow entities and shadow behaviors. Typically, you'll think of a shadow entity being the tyrant king, or maybe the inner child that's been rejected, or maybe you'll think of the opposite gender counterpart that you haven't experienced. If you're a man, you might think of the shadow woman. If you're a woman, you might think of the shadow man. These are all the shadowy entities that exist in our unconscious mind. We have been split, we have been fragmented. I don't really want to recap all of the psychology, just watch the videos in this series. I want to get really practical on this, but for the sake of a summary, we're working with figures and characters. And if you look at the golden shadow perspective, all we're doing is we're working with positive energy rather than negative energy. And the crucial emotion that I want you to focus on is fascination, adoration, respect, and also, in a more intimate sense, that kind of erotic arousal. That's also a very good sign towards your golden shadow, at least within a romantic context. I'm not going to focus there explicitly. Usually you want to look at admiration and respect being the main emotions, but some people will have golden shadow projections in a romantic context, which then goes into trauma bond territory and also has an overlay of various compulsive neurotic tendencies in regards to anima and animus projection. I haven't got time for that today. Let's focus on fascination and admiration and make this really practical. I actually shot a video like this 3 years ago, but I'm updating it with far more psychological nuance because I believe that you can get a lot more out of this exercise if you just get straight to the point, which is ironic because I've just rambled for a few minutes. This is the challenge of doing YouTube inside the course. I don't do this, but we're working with YouTube trying to make it precise. I want you to follow your admiration, and the only thing that I want you to think of at the beginning is who are the people that you admire in your life this moment. Not who you looked up to when you were a child, not who you looked up to 5 years ago. Who are the heroes and the heroines, the men and the women that you genuinely look up to? Who, just before the why, who? There should be at least 3 to 5 people. Some people will have lists when I've done these exercises in client sessions of up to 20 people. They're naming people they see on YouTube. They're naming people whose books they've read, whose podcasts they listen to, family members, friends, people that they know in their business networks. Who do you admire? It doesn't need to be someone that you have on a pedestal as they're the best thing ever. I'm not saying that you need to have the peak pinnacle of status, celebrity, accomplishment, or success. That has to be the standard. It can just be someone you look up to. For example, I look up to a variety of authors who are in this library because they took the time to research complex psychological territory for multiple decades and write wonderfully accessible or otherwise very sophisticated books that I've been able to learn from. Robert Johnson is someone who I admire, but at this stage in my own learning, he's not someone that I pedestalize. He did a very good job at popularizing Jungian psychology, but I'm not hero worshipping him because, again, the projection spectrum, you can go all the way into demonization and you can go all the way into angelic, larger-than-life fascination. I do not want to take you into that territory. The point of golden shadow integration is to draw down that higher inspired energy, bring it into your heart, and your higher self is no longer reflected in the various mirrors of the various characters that you see out there in the world. You're no longer fascinated and fixated by people that you're watching on YouTube or reading in a book or listening to on a podcast. You take all of that love, all of that longing to be more like them, but first you have to acknowledge that you do want to be more like them, and then you start to build those traits in yourself, and then it's truly inner work. But we need to see where you're launching those projections. If you don't have people that you openly admire and look up to, and it's not hero worship territory, just look for the very simple, I feel a lot of respect towards that person, or I'm particularly fascinated by that person. Maybe someone you know at work or someone that you've worked with, particular fascination, you can write their name down. Someone else that you had an incredible relationship with and they handled the relationship navigation so well in terms of it could be a friendship, it could be a family member, it could be a romantic partner. Things are no longer the same between the two of you, but you still have a lot of love and a lot of respect for them. Maybe they're on your list, but that might be going a bit too dissolute. For this exercise, you primarily want to have a list of about 3 to 5 people who are really distinctly people that you look up to. For me personally, when I've done this exercise a few times over the years, there's a very interesting pattern, which is it tends to be men who are about 20 to 30 years older than me, who are working roughly in the same space of trauma healing, psychology, coaching, personal development, or writing overall. I'm clearly projecting my golden shadow because the men that men look up to tend to be the men that they want to be more like. Women tend to have different psychological role modeling tendencies. You'll see this in the difference between how boys look up to superheroes and how girls tend to be more. This is really generalizing, so it's a massive cliche, but the cliche holds some value. Boys will look up to superheroes, but girls tend to enjoy doing the thing immediately. Girls will be a lot more that there's almost more sophistication if they take on the role earlier. I think little girls do mature much earlier than boys, and boys need that initiation process. They need that, like a grown man showing them the way into manhood. Whereas women, through a variety of means, biological and psychological, they go through the enacting of the roles at an earlier stage. You see girls playing, and they play in much more sophisticated games than usually little boys who are out throwing rocks at each other. And that's not to trivialize boy play, but I've been a little boy and wrestling around or running around, things that girls do as well, but girls can form more sophisticated social games at a much earlier age, and it tends to be a nuanced difference in role modeling. Maybe it's not relevant for this video, but if you're a woman who's watching this and you're like, actually, I don't really look up to anyone, I don't really admire anyone, it's not that you're wrong. Women just don't tend to have that same admiration, fascination that men do have, unless it's in a romantic context. Admiration, fascination, fixation, fantasy, obsession tends to be most strongly correlated with, again, generalizations, and I know I've triggered people. I've seen it in client work. I will speak with women, female clients, very intelligent, very creative, very powerful women, and the area of admiration or the area of fascination and fixation tends to be towards the people that they're dating or they want to date, rather than other role models in the space that they're in, that they're looking towards. Whereas men tend to focus more on career and status because, again, male priorities, typically speaking, go towards status and career, whereas women tend to place more emphasis on romantic relationships, which is why if you go into any YouTube comment section on romantic projection or any kind of romantic shadow work, you're going to see 90% of those comments being women, because men are much more interested in status and success as an overall conversation. So if you don't have the heroes that you worship, just paying attention to the deeper psychology that links back to your golden shadow projection of admiration, fascination, and fixation. And that's a lot of nuance, a lot of open doors that I can't fully explore with you in a single video. I wish we were in a session together because I could respond to you personally, trying the best in a generalized video. All wrapping it together, 3 to 5 named individuals, call them your heroes, call them people you're fascinated by, or just people that you respect. And then we break it down into the second stage, which is you take each of these people. You can write down their ages at the side. It's interesting. If you do this, you write down the age of the person that you look up to, and you'll start to see where your golden shadow lives in terms of psychic time. For most people, it will usually be someone who's older than them, but you can have very interesting cases, especially if you're at midlife, where you're looking down towards people who are younger than you, and that means that your golden shadow has some kind of more, well, it's a whole rabbit hole. There's so much there, but just pay attention, using your own intuition, using your own research abilities. Where are you looking towards it? Towards the future? Or are you retroactively looking towards the past and an innocence lost or a youthfulness that will never be regained? That's a whole nother conversation. You can get the age, but the most important thing that I want you to focus on is look at their behaviors and their traits. The people that you look up to, the men and women that you admire, they will have certain traits that when you list them out, person A, person B, person C, person D, and person E, you will be able to take a highlighter and mark off the same word or a synonym for the same word on multiple accounts. And it's almost shocking when you do this, because maybe if you're a teenager watching this, it won't be so clear. If you're past your mid-20s, and especially if by the time that you're in your 30s, you've got a strong preference of golden shadow projection. For example, all of the men and women that I would write down as my heroes or people who I'm fascinated by have very similar traits, and it's the traits that I also prioritize most in myself. And at this stage of personal refinement, my version of becoming my higher self, I'm looking towards very narrow traits expressed at depth over multiple decades. For example, the level of competence and intellectual capacity that I have within this particular field of psychology and inner work. That's the overall theme, and in each of the men and the women I see competence and expertise as something which I really respect. But I also see embodiment and fitness and playfulness and creativity across the board. Not every single person has all of these things, but I'm basically projecting my shadow onto the men and women who I look up to, because I likewise want to be more like that. It's not rocket science, but it's important to notice that you're doing it, because you might notice some anomalies in there. If you've noticed that you look up to someone, or you look up to a variety of people, more importantly, who have the same trait that feels alien from you. For example, for me, let's say it was a complete unconscious territory, and I only realized once doing this exercise, actually, I've listed 3 musicians, and I don't play music. What is it about a musician that really captivates my consciousness, and am I missing my own golden shadow by projecting that out there into the world, rather than actually developing my own potential? Because you'll usually have signs towards authenticity embedded in your psyche, and all it takes is a bit of unearthing to find the roads. And then it's your responsibility to walk along the roads and take up the music lessons and do the self-practice and blah-de-blah-de-blah. You might notice some anomalies in there, pay attention to them. I remember the first time that I did this exercise, probably 5 years ago at this point, I kept seeing this pattern of family. I kept seeing, like, especially in the men I was looking up to, they're a family man. And at that point, I was still working through my own issues with father wounds and what it means to be a man, and do I really want to have children? How important is that for me? And I look at the role models and I'm like, they all have children, but children aren't their life. That was the next stage. They all have children, but fundamentally, they're married to their work in the best sense possible. Every single person I looked up to, children are important, but they're primarily oriented towards a wider fathering principle. And sitting with this exercise and seeing the multiple psyches that I looked up to and drawing that back, it's no surprise. If you've watched any of my videos before, you can see that hopefully I'd probably be a pretty good dad, but also in terms of my overall, what am I trying to do in my lifetime, that fathering energy can also see an expression through these videos out there in the world in a very distinctly different way, but still that same core creative essence. And honestly, I think I'll do both. But in terms of priorities, in terms of the direction of my golden shadow projection, it's clear to see. I'm giving a few personal examples and I can't cover every base. The important thing that I want you to be aware of is what are the patterns and what's missing. You can also flip it on its head. And this is where it gets a bit confronting. You can do a translation towards negativity and the hate that you'll receive from the world as you're developing these traits. And if you've ever felt like people are keeping you down and saying you're not the kind of person who's like that, or who do you think you are to be like this, for example, you start doing something, a new business endeavor or a new creative endeavor, and your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your old friends kind of laugh at you, or they poke fun, or they put you down, you can very much expect, if you have a golden shadow trait of authentic, inspired creativity, you will receive the 180 exact opposite of creativity's dumb. Who are you to think that you're special? You think you're better than everyone else. You will have a few people, unfortunately, who do not want to join you on that path towards higher self-actualization, and you can expect to receive the exact opposite feedback from the world until the point where you become it. I remember, and this is making it about me, but I'm trying to make it living for you. I remember when I first started doing YouTube videos, and I rewatched my old Golden Shadow video just before filming this. It was over 3 years old, and I'm clunky, I'm awkward, I haven't quite got the confidence that I've built through my competence over the years of non-stop client work and research, because I just didn't have the experience. I was in the first few years, and now I'm much deeper on the journey, and it's clear in my presence. But at the beginning, I remember these comments would come through of, you sound pompous, or you sound, no, I get pompous, you sound pretentious, stop using those big words. That was the big one. I remember that even from my teenage years. Stop using all those big words. I have never received a compliment of like, well, I suppose I'll make it more specific. That particular criticism of stop using big words, who do you think you are, who are you trying to show off for, that dropped away once I'd actually gained the competence of being the thing. It was only during the threshold crossing from wanting to be more articulate and wanting to clearly express my ideas and thoughts in language, as that was awkward, as I was going through the ugly duckling stage, I received more criticism about my growing pains than I've ever experienced. There was more of that coming through, and it didn't put me off. It's just a temporary phase. I don't control my life via a stranger on the internet and what they think about my big words. But I haven't received a comment like that or a DM like that. I receive hundreds per month from anyone in the last year, 2 years. No one's saying, who are you with those big words, because I use the right level of articulation for the right audience, and that's a whole nother thing. But expect that you will receive hate and criticism as you start to redraw that golden shadow right back into your chest. You take the projection off of your hero figures, you bring it back, it cultivates, it gestates, and it starts to become something which is you. Yes, your higher self does have an eternal aspect, but also the higher self is embodied and continue to be formed via your choices and your actions. It's a complex esoteric topic, but for the sake of simplicity, you draw back the energy, you digest the energy. During that process of digestion, you'll try on a variety of symptomatic expressions. You'll have some golden shadow behaviors. Maybe you start speaking, maybe you start creating, maybe you start living your life differently, maybe you start training differently, maybe you have different boundaries. And as you're setting up these various elements of your new higher self, your best self, I almost hate saying these phrases because it's so cliche and it's not that mystical. You'll get a variety of tests from the world of people saying, well, are you really this kind of person? I'm going to give you a bit of a criticism, or I'm going to give you an avoidance. Just get through it. It doesn't matter. Honestly, it doesn't matter. Just go through it. I wouldn't be here making these videos with the wonderful career that I've built if I let random strangers who thought I was using big words and I was making videos that were too complex for them to understand. And admittedly, I wasn't the best in my presentation either. If I let all that awkwardness and that hiddiness get in the way of me, I would have lost my own golden shadow. And I wouldn't be able to make a video like this for you. It's important work. The ultimate principle of golden shadow integration is that you can't go your entire life projecting out your love and projecting out your fascination in the same way that you can't project out all of your hatred and all of your venom and expect that there won't be massive consequences in your personal development. And even as an overall framing, I haven't brought out the question for today's video, but I'll bring it out now. I've got it up right here. I don't know, this might be the latest I've ever brought up a question. 20 minutes or so into the video, I got asked, do you have any book recommendations on learning the path, on learning to gain autonomy and trust oneself? And then talking about insignificance and how to basically go away from external sources for reassurance. That being the key element there, because it's a golden shadow invitation. You bring out the external. It's very much inner work. It's an internal process of drawing back validation from the external into the internal, and you then nurture that via genuinely aligned actions over multiple years in a patient, slow process, and you stop chasing after validation, or you avoid that process and you project out that validation pathway in more of a fantasy space, which is just unreal. You're missing out on life if you're hero worshipping into your 30s and your 40s. Yes, you can respect people. I want you to have fascination and curiosity. There are people who I respect who do similar work to me, and we have mutual respect for each other. But if you're avoiding your own mission and you're not embodying your own potential because you're letting other people do it for you, or thinking that's going to work, or lying to yourself by thinking you're making more progress and being more authentic than you actually are, you are doing your soul a great disservice. Golden Shadow integration is more of the light-hearted, hopeful, optimistic version, or the aspect of shadow work where we're looking towards positive and negative and uplifting, not just the dark and heavy traumas that I've been exploring in this playlist. And also in my course, we've got entire modules on shame and apathy and trauma, but then we lead towards self-actualization in the final modules, in module 8 and module 9. We're literally looking at transpersonal psychology and a lot of esoteric soulful embodiments. You have to look at the dark before you can go to the light, but if you don't look at the light, you are almost guaranteed to spend way more time in the dark than you actually need to. I'm going to leave it here. You can join me over in the Shadowwork library if you're ready to really go deep with this. It's been an absolute pleasure to film over there because I get to reach true depth without censorship, and I often have to try and cut different avenues short on a YouTube video because I'm trying to do this in 20 minutes rather than having 3 or 4 hours to explore a concept from multiple angles. Join me over there if you're ready. I'm really proud of that work. If you want to stay here on YouTube with me, then click the Shadowwork playlist, and we're going to be continuing into the next episode with a flip back towards the darkness. We've explored some light, but let's go back into the darkness together and pendulum between the opposites.